His shoulders were broad as a woolly mammoth's beneath his blazer. His face had grown meaty with age. He looked older than my father, but I could still make out the handsome bone structure underneath. I walked over and turned toward the bookshelves, too.
"Rough crowd," he said.
"Right?" I said, and then felt embarrassed. I tried again. "I'm sorry about your divorce."
"Thank you,"
he said, and turned his face toward mine. My throat tightened, and I found myself unable to look in his direction. Was it his shoulders? The heat emanating from his heft? The shadow of his body on the bookcase? The memory of us glancing at each other across the table? I stared at the books instead. There, to the left, was the volume in which I had investigated as a child the disorder of one of my father's clients. My parents had often spoken of their clients in front of me, referring to them with code names, as if they were spies on a mission. I sat still in these moments, not daring to move for fear they'd remember I was there and stop speaking. This particular woman, Client Z was her code name, had graduated from college not long before and was bulimic. One day, when my parents were both working in their office, the apartment next door to ours, I'd taken down a psychology book to look up what this meant. Bulimic. 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 It meant that Client Z ate a lot of food, then made herself throw it back up, over and over again. This was disgusting and fascinating to me, and I knew at once that it was the thin, pale woman with oily black hair curtaining her face. I'd seen her through the peephole. I remembered, looking at the bookcase, how she'd walked with a hunch, staring at the floor. I'd gotten a glimpse of her face one afternoon. I'd stood on tiptoes at the peephole for long minutes near the time I knew her session was to end, gaze glued to the hallway, determined not to miss the moment she passed by. She looked splotchy, like she'd been crying. I'd pictured my father putting his hand on Z's cheek, wiping the soft pad underneath her eye with his thumb, her tilting her cheek into his palm, closing her eyes. Langham had shifted beside me, bringing me back into the room. It was the secret in public, perhaps, that I had responded to. Like a laser beam, piercing through the cloud of table conversation, visible only to Langham and me.
"He's on week 4 of his shame-attacking exercises."
Langham's eyes.
"Did you read the new paper on?"
Langham's mustache, his lips. "I heard she sold the practice." Langham's large fingers curled around his fork, which he sank into the pillow of his potatoes. That had sealed it, somehow, his hand on the fork. And then as we stood at the bookcase, finally beside one another, my parents were one room away as tension built thick between us. I sensed his head rotate away again, but he was there. I knew I could have him, and this was enough to make me wet. I sank into this dependable sensation. Escape. Certainty. Home. The DSM-5 was right in front of my face, flanked by a biography of Truman and a thick volume on the history of the zipper. Langham reached toward the zipper book, his arm brushing my shoulder. He flipped to the back.
"How could anyone possibly read 683 pages on the history of the zipper?"
he asked. We both laughed, and this dispelled my paralysis so I could turn toward him. I let myself linger on his face. His mustache, though thick, was trim and well-combed, and the skin of his cheeks looked soft, like he'd just shaved. I wondered what his aftershave smelled like. The hum of conversation wafted from the dining room. He took a small step toward me, as if to give me room to retreat. Scent of cedar. His eyes moved over my face, taking in its details, too. I wondered if he approved of my eyes, or found fault with my nose. We were negotiating a kiss, informing each other that it was on the horizon. I held his gaze. I willed him to pursue me, the ultimate control. He leaned in, his mustache scratching my face. Since that night last week, every time the phone rang, my heart had jumped in excited panic. But it was the drugstore, a wrong number, my roommate asking me to buy